Unit 4.6. This is the last unit before we jump into a project that uses all this information we've been studying in Unit 4. But let's just take a look at this one. This one, I'm going to consider this as the most detailed look of these if statements. Okay, so now we're looking at them with multiple statements put together. So there are two ways we put them together. We can stack them, that's known as stacking, or we can nest them, known as nesting. So what we're going to look at is stacking versus nesting. First off, stacking. When you stack if statements, you literally put one if statement on top of another. Where there is no word else is here, there is no else. There are all these if statements on top of each other. Very similar to putting a book on top of a book, on top of a book, on top of a book, which is called stacking. So right now, what's going to happen here is there is a difference between stacking and nesting. Stacking occurs when these things are on top of each other, and stacking requires that each condition is checked. So let's make a note. Each condition is checked. So what that means is if you have an if statement here, it checks this condition. If it's true, it executes what's inside this block. It goes to the next one. It checks if it's true. It executes what's inside that block. It goes to the next one. And it does each one step at a time. So this is literally a step-by-step operation here where some of this code might run or may not run, right? If this condition is true, this runs. But if this is false, this does not run. If this is true, this runs, and so on. That's stacking. You must check every single one. Nesting. Now you see how I say here at most 2 deep. I have 3 deep here. So what is nesting? Nesting is when you have a structure and inside of that structure's block there is another structure. I'm using if because that's all we're doing right now, but this holds true for all structures. Anytime you have something inside the block, that's called nesting. So right now I'm 3 deep. 1, 2, 3. 3 if statements, not stacked, but nested. I have this at most 2 deep here because what happens here is we don't want to do this when you write code. I'm only showing here for illustration, but we don't want to actually do this. Now, yeah, there are times when we could get away with this, and this creates dimension. Once you start nesting, it creates dimension. So this is a 3-dimensional structure. Okay, 1, 2, 3. If I have 2 dimensions, it's 2-dimensional structure. Now I know you might be thinking, is that like length and width? Yes, it is. It's like x and y in a coordinate system. We do a coordinate system x and y. That's a 2-dimensional structure. So once we add a third one, we're talking about a 3-dimensional structure. Now we're going from an x or y to an x, y, z, more like a cube as opposed to a square. So this gets confusing. The reason why we say at most 2 deep is because we want to keep our structures flat. If you look on Google, Amazon, any Apple, they'll all say keep your structures flat. That means don't nest too deep, because when you start nesting too deep, the dimension go up, and that's getting very complex. So what we're going to do here, even though I'm showing you 3, I'm only going to do 2. Every time you see me doing something, I'll give it 2 deep at most. We basically want 1, but if we can't get around to solving the problem with 1, we may venture off and go with 2, but never go into 3. Okay, that's too complex. So that's nesting. All right, structure inside of a structure. Well, I'm using the word structure because it's not reserved for if. Okay, as we do more structures, you'll see that the nesting has more to do with what's inside the block as opposed to what this actual control structure that we're working with is. So once you, and same is true for stacking. Okay, it is not reserved for the if. So I could stack other structures as well, and I could nest other structures. But for right now, we're doing if, so we could take a look at how this looks with an if statement. Now, if I'm going down a little bit further down, we have this nested multiple selection where the else comes in. This one, I'm going to show an example of each one, but this one is the one that's a little bit more complex. So we would look into it and see why is it that this is nested, because it doesn't look nested. See, if you look at this looks nested. You could see the if inside of an if, and you can see another if inside of this if. So this if is inside two ifs, whereas these, they're not inside. Kind of look like it looks stacked, but it's not. It's actually nested. So we'll explain how this one works and see that this is really this. But here's what I'm going to go ahead and say though, is that this nested structure here, you don't have to check each one. See the stacking here? You check each one. This one, no. What do I mean? If I check this condition and it's false, this whole thing is ignored. You only go inside the structure to execute the code in there if this is true. So if this is true, I'll come in here. If this is true, now I'm in here. And if this is true, now I'm in here. Right? But what if this is true and this is false? Well, if this is true and I get in here and this is false, this whole structure is ignored. Now, if there's another statement inside here, let's say something down here, that would run because that's true. So it's going to run here. So the statements that's not related to these structures but are still inside this is where getting a little confusing because we're mixing things. See why we need to do 2 deep, 3 deeps when we have other statements in here? It gets a little tricky. But if I put a statement, let's say here, this statement would be inside this if. So if this is true and this is false, the statement that's here is going to run, but this is ignored. Okay, because this is false, I'm not going to even get to this. Up here, it's different because every time I see one of these stacked, I'm just going to check. And the only idea here is whether it's true or false, and it's going to be executed or not. But here, I may not check. Like if this is false, I'm not checking this. So let's say this was false, but this statement, by looking at it without considering this, is true. This doesn't run because in order to get to this, I have to pass that. Okay, so there is this idea of a dependency. I can only get to him if he is true. That's not true up here. Okay, these are independent of each other. There's a dependency in here. Same is true down here. So we'll take a look at each one of these in code, okay, because just seeing them like this, it's okay to see the structures, how they look, but actually writing code to make them do something of importance, it's a whole different ball game. So we'll do 3 examples. We'll do a stacking one, we'll do a nested one like this, and then we'll do a multiple selection nested one like this. Okay, and to do this, we'll focus on grades. Everybody know how grades work? So let's just look at grades. The first thing I want us to focus on is stacked. So in this stacked structure, there is no else. And if you're wondering, wait a minute, where's your curly braces? Reminder, one statement, don't need them. I could put it here, could, but it just makes my code looks a little bit too cumbersome and long. It's already long, so I don't want to add these extra things to make it even longer. Since it's only one statement, no need for the curly braces. All right, now, even though I say no need, I still indent. Remember, the indentation is important because this is suggesting that this statement is inside this block. Okay, so let's make sure we get that clear. Well, everybody knows grades, so that's why I went here, so we could see. And also, this is what I give you on a quiz. Because you're familiar with it, I don't want the grade itself to be something new. I want the structure to be what's new, and we can consider the structure to figure out these grades. Now, one thing I want to make sure we get clear here is that the stacking is going to check each one. That's what we said. It's going to check each one. Okay. So let's go ahead and run this and see how this works. So 85 is the grade. Now you would think in your mind, well, that's a B. It should really be printing this. But let's see how it works. 85, is it greater than or equal to 97? No. Don't print A plus. Working good so far. Is 85 greater than or equal to 93? Nope. It's false. Don't print that. Checking each one. Is 85 greater or equal to 90? Nope. Don't print that. Is 85 greater or equal to 87? Nope. Don't print that. Seems like it's working. Is 85 greater or equal to 83? Yes. It prints a B. See, but the problem is, it doesn't stop there. Is 85 greater than or equal to 80? Yes, it prints a B minus. Is 85 greater than or equal to 77? Yes, it prints a C plus. Is 85 greater than or equal to 73? Yes, it prints a C. Wow, this 85 is giving us a lot of grades. It's giving us all of these grades, right? Because it's going to check each one. And once it's true, it's going to happen. Is 85 greater than or equal to 67? Yep, you got a D plus. But that's unfair. I got an 85 and I got a D plus. It's going to print all of them. And if we take the last one that it prints, it would be D minus. So let's go ahead and run this. Let's look at down here. Oh, look at that. All the grades we got from the 85. So stacking these grades, if we were trying to figure out which letter grade this gives us, it's not the right way to go. That's not the right way to go. I mean, it gave us the right one initially, but then it continued giving us all these. So, I mean, think about how can I make this somewhat better. All right, let's move on to example 2. Example 2 now, we are going to be nesting. But we're focusing only on a passing grade, okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at it as if we looking at a passing grade only. And the grade is still 85. We didn't change the grade. We're going to keep it as 85. And what I want to know is what happens when this runs. See? Is it true that your grade is greater than or equal to 60, not 80? It's true because 85. That means we're going to get in here. Is it true that it's greater than 70? Well, let's put greater than or equal to just to make sure everything is the same. Is it true that it's greater than or equal to 70? Yeah, well then you're in here, right? And by in here, I included this statement. See how confusing it's starting to look? Because this statement is inside this F. So if this is true, it's definitely going to print this. Well, we found out that this was true because 85 says it's going to print this. And then we get in here and it says, is it true that 85 is greater than or equal to 80? Yes, it is true. It's true that 85 is greater. No, this is not true. So this won't print, but this will. Let's go ahead and run that and see how that looks. See? Passed the B or higher, passed the C B minus or higher, C minus or higher, passed. So it executed, let's see what it executed. It executed this one, and this one. All these three here printed, but not this one, because this was not true. So you see, this is very confusing and very cumbersome to write. So what we want to jump to then is if we have a situation where we have multiple selection, multiple grades based on the number, okay, multiple selection of grades based on the number, we can write that using the multiple statement like this with an else. So what happens here is if this is true, it does what's in here and it ignores the rest. Why does it ignore the rest? Because this is an else. And this is a not for that. Now it looks like it's not nested, so this is what I was talking about. I'm going to show you that it actually is nested. So let me show you by writing the first. I'm going to take the first one that was stacked and I'm going to make it a nested one. Okay, but I'm going to also show you what actually happens. So let's say I put an else here. So I'm going to ignore this for a second. We'll come back to it at the end just to show you how it works. So let's say this was the structure, right? It says if it's true that it's greater than that, do this and so on. What happens here is I could put my curly braces on. Okay, I know it's one statement and I don't need them, but that's how this looks. Let me line this up nicely so we can get the idea. It doesn't look this way when you watch it written out like this. It doesn't look this way, but this is exactly what happens. Let's just make sure we get clear with the double selection. See? If this is true, it does this, and it will not get to that. Okay? So what we have here is a double selection, but inside we have another double selection. And if we keep nesting like that, the else would be here. And then we'd have another if in here. I'm not going to write out all of it, but you want to get the idea that nesting is occurring. And the way this works is that if you didn't get an A plus, you got something else. Let that one sink in. If you didn't get an A plus, you got something else. If you didn't get an A, you got something else. If you didn't get an A minus, you got something else. And you could literally see it. It's going to get nested. It's going to be sliding all the way, coming down diagonally, a lot of them, right? We don't want to write it this way because it's very confusing. So what we do is we pair up the if and the else as if we had just an if and an else. So why we do that? Let me explain it by taking this out. Let's take this out so you don't look too confusing. The else statement has only one statement, happens to be an if. So we don't need the curly braces. The else statement only has one. This if only has one statement. Don't need the curly braces. So you got one statement, he has one statement. His one statement happens to just be an if, but his if has only one statement. Right? So he has one, he has one. So what we do is we just pair them up. We just pair them up. And that's where we got this multiple selection thing. So you could see it's a nested structure, but it's written as if the else if makes it look stacked. So all I got to do now is put an else in front of every if. That's all. Now I have multiple selection. Okay. Now, because I'm doing this, you get to a point where you reach to the last one. And the last one is, okay, if you didn't get an A plus or an A or B or B minus and all that coming all the way down to the, then you got an F. So why are we writing an if down here? There is no other condition. It's just else. Right? Because if you didn't get one of these, you got something else, and that something else is an F. This structure is called a multiple selection structure, not stacked. You know how this one works? This one would pick the correct grade. See, I'm running it and I'm looking. See, it picked a B. Let me show you that is correct. I'm going to do something else. Let's go up and try again. Let's make this a 95. Why not? Remember, the last thing to do was the multiple selection. See, we can't trust this guy. This guy's going to give us a lot of answers. Let's run it. The stack structure, look at the stacked. You got an A minus, a B plus, a B, got everything. And then this one says, oh, finally, we got this because we got an A minus or higher. This one is working well. Kind of weird, but look at that. Multiple selection, we only got an A. Let's try one more. Let's say we got a 99. And let's look again and see what happens. Well, this first stacked one looked like it gave us every grade, huh? Every possible grade. Except the F. And then this guy down here is saying the same thing, but look at that. Got an A plus. So, if you have multiple selections, but you want to select one, not many like the stacked, you want to do a multiple nested selection using else if. Especially if there's one statement, it could be written nice and compactly by leaving off the curly brace. And when you get to the final case, there aren't any more cases, no more types of grades. We go to just an else. Okay. So this is how we're going to use these. We can write this in any way you want, just as long as you pay attention to your logic, run it, always print, make sure you're correct, make sure your logic makes sense, make sure it's selecting the correct thing. This is how we use all that we've just done in Unit 4. Okay, so we figured out how to create these different control structures, how to use them, how they look, and we're going to recap really quickly, looking back, stacking versus nesting. Check each one, and do what's inside the block if it's true. Nesting, check, and if it's false, it's over. If there are additional statements in here, though, those are going to run, but these are not. Okay, I shouldn't say false. If it's true here, we get inside this, but if this is false inside here, this guy doesn't work. And same is true inside here. It looks a little weird written this way, but this is happening at most 2 deep. Try not to go to 3. And if you have a lot of them, we go to multiple selection using the else with the double selection, carefully crafted to get us our Boolean logic. That brings us to the end of 4.6.